Okay, now we're going to discuss section 1.6, solving for a variable. And in this section, we're going to work with formulas and with literal equations. And here's a formula that you're going to see a lot in math and science. D is equal to R times T. Let me tell you, D stands for distance, R stands for rate, also known as speed, and T stands for time, okay? So that's what this equation does. If you want to find out the distance, let's say you're going in a car, and you know at which speed you're driving, and you know how long it took you to get to the place you want it to get to, then I can use this formula to figure out how far you traveled. I can figure out the distance you traveled from your starting point to your ending point if I know the velocity at which you're riding and I know how long it took you to get there. So this is a formula to help you calculate those kinds of problems. And we're going to discuss example 1 in your book. Example 1 in your book talks about a person named Ernst van Dyke, and it tells you that he won the wheelchair race in the Boston Marathon in the year 2004. Now, and they give you some information. They tell you that it took him time, right? My variable for time is t. It took him 1.3 hours to complete the race. And it also tells you that the race was about 26.2 miles. So they're telling you the distance that he covered in 1.3 hours. The distance he covered was 26.2 miles. And they're asking you in example 1, what was his average speed? So they're asking you for R. What was his speed? Now, what we want to do is we want to take this formula and solve for R. That means we isolate the variable R, which is what they're asking you to do, and then we're going to substitute these values into that new formula, and we're going to answer the question. So here's my formula. D is equal to R times T. Now, if I want to isolate R, I want to leave R alone because I want a formula that says R is equal to what, okay? So that means I'm going to isolate R. Now, let's look at R. R is being multiplied by T. So how do I get rid of that T if it's being multiplied by R? We do the inverse operation. We divide by T. Does that make sense? If I divide by T on one side of the equal sign, remember the equal sign here, if I divide by T on one side of the equal sign, I have to divide by T on the other side of the equal sign. And look at what happens. I end up with, let me erase this R. If we, when I divide by T on both sides, notice on this side, T divided by T is equal to 1. So on this side, I have R times 1, right? Because T divided by T is 1. And on this side, I have D over T. Now, R times 1 is the same thing as R. So R equals D over T. Remember, we always write our isolated variable to the left. So I'm rewriting it here. R is equal to D over T. And there, I found a new formula from the given formula that I can use to answer this question. Let's answer the question. It says, what is the speed? If I know the distance is 26.2 miles, so let's plug that in where D is for distance. 26.2 miles, and then let's plug in the time it took him, which is 1.3 hours. Let's plug that in the denominator, 1.3 hours. And now you take your calculator. Let me get my calculator here. And 26.2 divided by 1.3 hours is equal to 20.2, and we rounded it off, so this is approximately equal to 20.2. And what are the units? This is speed, so the units are miles per hour, because we're talking about speed. So this is how fast he was racing in that wheelchair that he got to the finish line, which was 26.2 miles away. He got there in 1.3 hours. And here is the answer. Okay, now I want to ask you. This. Can you solve this formula for t? I want you to take this formula, and instead of solving for r like we just did, I want you to solve for t. How do we do that? Let's go ahead and do it. Here's what you do. If you want to isolate t, t is being multiplied by r. So if I'm multiplying by r, the inverse operation of multiplying is dividing. So I will divide on both sides of the equal sign by what amount? I want to isolate t, so I'll divide by r on both sides. And watch what happens. R divided by r is equal to 1 times t equals d divided by r. So on this side, 1 times t is equal to t and d over r. So here is that same formula, but we've solved for t. There it is. What if I ask you, find the time in hours. Find the time in hours that it would take Van Dyke to travel 26.2 miles. So they're telling me the distance would be 26.2 miles. If his average speed was 18 miles per hour. Miles per hour. So now they're posing the question, look, can you tell me the time it'll take him? If his velocity was 18 miles per hour and he traveled that same distance, how long would that take him? So let's plug in the information that they give us. T is equal to D. D is 26.2 miles. And the speed is 18 miles per hour. T is equal, if you take your calculator, this is approximately equal to 1.46 hours. So obviously, if he's riding at a slower velocity than the velocity they had said originally, it would take him longer to cover this distance. I will do another video on solving for a variable.